On this week's Waypoint, rest in peace Kassadin the Assassin, we go over the latest patch notes, Riot's listening to all of the Lee Sin feedback, and there are some huge changes that are coming to boot enhancements. What's up guys, and welcome to Waypoint, your weekly League of Legends recap for March 20th, 2014. I'm your host, Mike Shaffnet. Now patch 4.4 hit live servers, bringing with it the Kassadin changes that we talked about a few weeks ago. To quickly sum up what we already went over, his passive now lets him move through units, his Q no longer silences but interrupts channeled abilities and gives him a shield, and his W will let him pack a little bit more of a punch in melee and restore some of his mana. But the changes are much more extensive than the community first realized though, and it turns out that this is a pretty big rework. Force Pulse, his E, has seen a huge damage nerf, which really is the theme of all of these changes when you consider his Q and his R. If you gave Kassadin just a few kills, the game was practically over. He was a terror in solo queue and was almost always banned out in the LCS. With these new changes, however, though, he's not really going to be the uncontrollable assassin that he used to be, but hey, at least he's got a slightly larger melee attack range, right? No? That's not a good trade-off? What's saving Kassadin from an early retirement is his new ultimate Riftwalk. The damage will now scale off of max mana instead of ability power, but more importantly, the cooldown on Riftwalk will be just 3 seconds at its max rank. Still, with its scaling off of maximum mana, it's not like a death cap is gonna make this ability a champion killer. So what do these changes mean for Kassadin? Well, I think what we're gonna see this time around is a completely different kind of Kassadin. I think that he's gonna build a little bit more tanky and maybe build for mana and utility with items like Iceborne Gauntlet or maybe even Frozen Heart. Maybe he'll be jumping around consistently in team fights trying to slow the enemy opposition with Force Pulse, or maybe just trying to be a huge pain in the ass for the AD carry. That style of play isn't something that we usually see from a mid lane though, so it's kind of hard to say. Whatever happens, we're gonna see less Kassadin, which is probably a good thing overall. The rest of the patch notes aren't as out in left field as Kassadin changes, however they also answer a lot of the community's recent concerns. Annie rose to prominence as one of the strongest supports in the game with the support buffs in Season 4. That is if you can call burning people alive a support skill. Her base damage has been nerfed across the board here, and her AP ratios have been buffed slightly to compensate. This should ensure that she remains strong in the mid lane where she can build with the big AP items while making her slightly weaker when she's in the bottom lane. Diana, Ezreal, Fizz, and Twisted Fate all saw minor AP ratios to make up for an absolutely monstrous nerf to Lichbane's damage. None of those champions are seeing a huge amount of play at the moment, and I don't think that this change is really going to help. But this change more directly seems to be targeted towards nerfing the mid lane Lulu and KO players who have already been hit by the nerf bat recently. It's almost as if being two-shot by an invincible angel isn't really fun. Who knew? It's a mixed bag of changes for Elise because her Q, which was her main source of damage, was hit pretty hard, especially against monsters. This is going to hurt her clear speed substantially and make her less of a beast at stealing Baron. Cocoon now has a longer stun at max level, but a shorter one early, which is definitely gonna hurt her snowballing potential, especially because you don't want to max it early. Repel has a slightly shorter cooldown, but it isn't really significant, but more importantly, her spiderlings will now have more health, because, well, that's important. Kog'Maw has gotten a really interesting change. Now, instead of being a targeted ability, his Q is rather a straight line skill shot with 1,000 range and even more armor and magic resistance shredding. That's a huge buff for last hitting against a tough lane opponent, or maybe even harassing or sieging when you're in a strong position rather than a weak one. Sadly though, its AP ratio has been nerfed, but I'm hopeful that it won't stop the glorious return of AP Kog'Maw. All hail the Godmaw. Sivir has seen a rise in play since her rework, mostly because of the team-wide speed boost on her ultimate that makes it so easy to engage or disengage. This patch brings with it a damage nerf to her boomerang blade per enemy hit, as well as an increase in mana cost for her ricochet. This is meant to address her lane pushing potential, especially how easily it can be for her to push the wave at level 1 to get an early level 2 and win the lane right there. Vi has been doing some serious work in the jungle lately, so Riot is nerfing the base damage on her Q Vault Breaker while increasing its AD ratio. Vi's Q was one of the hardest hitting abilities in the game even when you had tank items, so the nerf is definitely warranted. But if you wanted to go for more of an Elder Lizard Brutalizer build here, now you should actually see a damage increase. The cooldown on her ultimate at early levels was also hit, mainly because it's a free kill the moment she hits 6. But I don't think that these nerfs will do a whole lot to her because she still has one of the best engages in the entire game. The cooldown on when you can first use your trinket wards has been upped from 90 seconds to 120 seconds, meaning that we won't see free wards on the map until the 2-minute mark. This probably won't have much effect on the average player too much, but it's a huge change for the higher ranks as well as the LCS. Basically, Riot wants more action at level 1. They want invades, they want clever buff steals, they want early kills and big plays. However, at the higher tiers, this will probably mean that support players will be spending more of their starting money on wards, which could have an adverse effect. Some good news for top laners is that teleport is getting a huge buff. Teleporting to a turret will now take 100 seconds off its cooldown, but canceling a teleport will take 50 seconds less off its cooldown now. What this means is that we're much more likely to see top laners aggressively shove the lane and then teleport back for an early advantage. It also means that weaker lanes who get shoved in won't be as punished for going back. I could go even as far to say that we'll start to see more teleports mid, which already isn't that uncommon. Alright, now I know that we're all League of Legends fans here, but come on, sometimes the servers do go down, and sometimes you're just absolutely sick of AFK players that are ruining your games and even your promotional series. And sometimes you just cannot stand playing against Teemo. It's during those times that I like to play MMOs, and there just so happens to be a big one on the way. Some of you guys might have heard of a series called The Elder Scrolls. Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim? Is it ringing any bells? I thought so. We'd love to hook you guys up with a great pre-order deal that we've got going on at the moment. This offer is valid for both standard and Imperial editions of the game, depending on how much you guys like shiny white horses. Either edition will get you a 3 days head start, 30 days of game time, and the Explorers Pack DLC, which will let you play any race in any faction. If you guys are interested and ready to jump back into the Elder Scrolls world, then head on over to offergb.com/ESO. You'll find a link in the description below, and using that link is a great way to help support this channel. Alright, newsflash, Riot is actually reverting a lot of the controversial Lee Sin changes on the PvE. We covered most of the proposed changes last week, and I'm actually really glad to see that Riot is listening to the community on this one. Ward jumps will now still be possible and won't leave you energy starved, but you won't get a shield for jumping to minions or wards, and the cooldown is increased unless you jump to a champion, which is clearly what Riot wants you to do. This seems like a rather good compromise for jungle Lee Sin players, but I gotta be honest, I don't really know how Lee Sin top players are gonna feel about it. Last week we talked about Dragon Rage receiving a massive damage nerf, but having made up for that when you use it to kick the target into multiple teammates. That change has been reverted since those situations are actually fairly rare. The damage has still been nerfed, but not nearly as much as it was, and it's still a very hard-hitting ability with a game-changing knockback. The rest of the changes are still generally in place here with damage nerfs to Q and E. Riot remain confident that Flurry, Lee Sin's passive, which has seen an enormous buff, will more than make up for the damage loss. The community, however, remains skeptical though, as 100% attack speed on your next 2 attacks for every ability cast is great, but how realistic in a team fight is it when you have to waste your abilities in order to get close to begin with? I'm not too sure. And finally, major boot enhancements and summoner spell changes are planned for patch 4.5 and 4.6. Home Guard is being hit rather hard because everyone bought them and they were so effective at holding off late game sieges. Instead of instantly restoring you to full health and mana when you reach the fountain, now they'll restore 35% of your missing health and mana per second. They'll still be super effective, but they just won't be a must-buy for everyone anymore, especially when you combine it with all of the other enhancement changes. The Führer boots are receiving a significant drop in price to just 475 gold, which will make them a much more attractive option. At that price, I think we'll end up seeing it a lot more on dueling champions like Vayne. The 12% movement speed on attack or spell might even be what the new Lee Sin needs to take advantage of his passive. Captain's boots, which honestly no one really ever bought, are seeing a much needed buff. Allied champions that run towards someone with the captain's boots will now get a 10% speed boost. In addition, their price is also going down drastically to just a minuscule 600. But I'm not convinced that they'll see much more play. However, I could see them on a defensive support champion in a pokey disengaged composition. Or potentially for that AD carry who really needs his team to peel for him. However, the one thing I guess I'd say here is that all of that's going to get thrown out of the window though, because if this change does go through, everybody's going to be buying distortion boots. The cooldown reduction on Ghost, Flash, and Teleport is being nerfed by 5%, but the other changes that come up make it much more important. Distortion will give Ghost 7% more movement speed and increase its duration a slight bit. Flash will have its cast range bumped up from 400 to 480, and Teleport will grant 30% movement speed for 3 seconds upon its completion. Now, Riot called these changes crazy and potentially overpowered, and I've gotta say, I would 100% agree with them. I would be absolutely shocked if these changes hit live servers in their current state. The Ghost buff is pretty self-explanatory, but the Flash cast range increase is huge. Flash used to have a much longer cast range, and it was nerfed because of how strong it was. The extra 80 range might not sound like a lot at first, but that really will make a difference, especially when you consider wall jumping. Teleport with a 30% movement speed buff is absolutely insane, and teleport ganks just became even deadlier. Seriously guys, imagine Malphite teleporting in with 30% movement speed, a longer flash, and his ultimate. Good luck getting out of that. That does it for this week's episode of Waypoint. Be sure to check back every week on Thursday for the latest League of Legends news. If you guys like this video, be sure to like and comment below, as I promise it helps spread our audience and let us reach more people. If you guys want to see more League of Legends content recaps and updates, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Wall Nation TV. I'm Mike Shaffnet. You guys can follow me on Twitter at Mike Shaffnet. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys at the next Waypoint.